Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to those of you here in the room, those of you on Zoom, and those of you who will watch this in the future. This is very exciting. We're really glad you're here today. This is going to be a really interesting talk. I'd like to introduce Dr. Tom Pantazes. I'm going to read a little bit of his bio, but then I'm going to embellish. So Tom is an instructional designer with digital learning and innovation at Westchester University in Pennsylvania, who loves helping instructors integrate technology and learning pedagogy. He's going to share a lot of his recent research on digital instructional video, but he's also interested in virtual reality, content interactivity, and simulation. So you'll see some of that embedded in the presentation today. This is the part I liked. If he's not recording or building videos, he will be perhaps building with Legos, and you can catch up with him on Twitter at Tom Pantazes. Most importantly, though, Tom is a two-time graduate of William & Mary and a former student of mine back in 2008 in the master's program in curriculum instruction, and so I claim credit for 85% of his brilliance. So with that, right. Tom, welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks, everyone, both here in person and online, for sharing some of your precious time with me. And for those in the future who will be watching the recording, thank you for doing that as well. I hope to make that a worthwhile choice on your part today. Personally, I am very excited to be back here at my alma mater with an opportunity to share some of the research work I've been doing here with all of you. And I will skip all the parts that Mark already covered, so we can get right to it.
Oh, Tom, maybe mention about posting questions in chat.
Okay, so if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Mark will be keeping an eye on that and ask them on your behalf. So let's get rolling. As Mark said, I'm currently an instructional designer at Westchester University, and we like to claim that we are the flagship of the Pennsylvania state system of higher education. And it's about 17,000 students with around 1,000 faculty. And as a designer, I work with approximately 150 of them on a regular basis. So that's the context from which I'm coming from. And a component of my job involves supporting online courses. And as you are likely aware, online learning in higher education in the United States has been on a steady growth trend upward. And alongside that growth trajectory with online learning has been a use of digital video. I have a personal interest in video. Been making videos since the 8th grade. And so when you think about that interest coupled with seeing this growth in my work and seeing how faculty were creating video, it got me down this path here. So the questions that I was starting to wrestle with eventually became my dissertation, and you are welcome to take a look at it if you are interested. It is freely available on the Westchester Digital Commons, and it holds a lot of the underlying data and comments that I'll be referencing today. So if you really want to get in the weeds, have at it. Or you can just sit through this and you should be good. You'll have the pretty good cliff notes. So I chose video because it's kind of always been an interest, and I've made a lot of video with the work that I do prior to starting my research. It's an area that I consistently still get questions about from faculty, so there's interest there. And I realized pretty early on that while a lot of research has been focused on student and how they have responded to video, how they learn from video, there's not been a lot of research that looks at how faculty are working with video and how faculty are creating video and using that in their context. And so that drove what I did. So the underlying theory for me was the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, and that states that the use of words and pictures together is a more effective way of learning than words alone or pictures alone. And the theory identifies 3 types of cognitive load. The first is extraneous, which is the processing of extra information, which is not related to the learning goal or task at hand. And your goal as a video creator is to try to remove, cut down, get rid of those things that are extra. The next cognitive load is essential. And this is the processing or organizing of information that has to occur in the learner's brain. So we want to emphasize that. We want to reinforce that. We want to strengthen that. And that processing is typically things that can't be offloaded. So that's where we want to really put some effort in trying to help our learners. So your goal is to encourage that, to promote that. And the final one is germane, and that's the sense-making portion of the processing, or in layman's terms, its engagement in the learning. It's a very human-focused element, and you'll see that when we get to the principles, how human-oriented they are. So situated inside these 3 cognitive loads are a series of design principles, which you can see here. I've identified 11 that we're going to touch on today. And as I talk, I'm going to do so with a video-oriented focus. However, many of these principles also apply in presentations that you might deliver in the classroom as well. So there are definitely things that you can pull out to utilize, for example, when creating PowerPoint that you might use to go along with something you're doing with students. Here's a little context about the data collection and the methods that I used. I used a mixed methods explanatory sequential design to develop a case study focused on describing instructor implementation of those 11 principles in video that they created themselves, so instructor created video, that they used in online courses. So the context is specific to online in terms of the data that I've collected. I grabbed from 3 primary sources. There was a survey of 17 questions that I used to identify 5 instructors who were doing the best job, according to the survey, of implementing the principles. I then interviewed those 5 instructors and also collected 1 video from each one of them for analysis. I used the 11 principles as the codes across all the data sets to triangulate in on what it was saying, what it was telling us.
Question.
Yes.
Who's the survey directed to? The students?
The survey was directed to instructors of online courses. I'll get to that in just a second. That's literally the next slide, so it's a great question. So setting was a large regional public university in the mid-Atlantic. It had over 900 full and part-time instructors that had been, and the institution as a whole had been engaged in online learning since 2010. Data collection took place in the fall of 2020. So of that almost 1,000, I was looking at 140 that were teaching online in that particular semester. Just a note about the COVID aspect, we have a training requirement at our institution where you cannot teach online until you've gone through the training. So I was using that to target in on who I knew exactly those folks were. And they would have been teaching online no matter what was happening. So they were still teaching online even though everyone else was also teaching online in the same fall semester, because that was still heavy in the pandemic at that point. The average instructor who completed the survey had previously taught 13 online course sections prior to that semester, and they were teaching 2 online course sections in that semester on average. As you can see with the table on the right, the conditions at the university also led to most instructors being eager, excited to be teaching online when they first started, and we believe that carries forward. At least we hope so. I didn't specifically ask that question, but there is good support and interest for online at this institution. 88% of the 131 courses that were captured within the survey data were using video. And the average course had 23 videos in it. Most of our courses are 15 weeks. I did not specifically ask 15-week or 7-week, so that is a flaw in terms of the design a little bit. But of that 23, 14 were made by the instructor themselves, and 9 were made by someone else. So they could have found something on YouTube, TED Talk, PBS, who knows? Could come from anywhere. I think that's interesting that instructors are spending a little more time creating things themselves than utilizing what might already be out there. I thought that was fascinating. And then also this 10% of instructors who said they were not going to be making any video during that semester. It doesn't mean that they weren't using video, just they weren't going to be creating anything during the semester itself. Data from the survey indicated on average it takes an instructor 1 hour and 48 minutes to make a single video. The most popular tools used were Camtasia, Kaltura, Zoom, and PowerPoint. However, PowerPoint use is likely significantly underrepresented, as 76% of those survey results indicated that some sort of lecture style was being used. And when I interviewed the 5 instructors, 3 of them did not report on the survey that they used PowerPoint. Yet when I talked to them in their interviews, they did indicate that they used it. So I think that's a fascinating look at how we may not perceive that tool as being a tool for video creation, even though it can be a very powerful one at times. I'd also like to point out that these tools were the ones that were available at the university and supported by the university. So it's not surprising that they were the most frequently used ones. The other thing I'll say here too is that each of the 5 people that I interviewed used a different combination of tools to create their videos. And I have looked at that as it doesn't really matter what tools you use so much as that you're applying the principles with the tools that you are comfortable with. So if you extrapolate this to William and Mary, Kaltura changes to Panopto. Camtasia doesn't get really used in the same way here. Here's a screen capture tool. But I think you would see similar percentage usages if you were to ask the same question. All right, so you have some context about where the data came from, some of the data collection. We're going to get into the principles at this point. So I'm going to go in order by cognitive load. We'll just progress through. And for each principle, I'm going to define it, give you a sense of what it is, and then I'm going to ask you to take a guess as to how well you think the instructors in my survey were implementing it. It is just a guess. I'm not expecting you to know this information, but it'll give you a sense of how your perceptions align with what the data actually says, and give us a little interactivity and a little fun. So we'll start with extraneous cognitive load, and the first one within that context is coherence. And coherence is where you include only those elements in a video that are needed to meet the learning objective. So that means no extra visual elements, and in many instances, it means no music. There are a few exceptions to the use of music. It is appropriate when it's needed to meet the learning objective of the video. For example, if you're teaching about harmony, you would want to include examples of harmony. That's a coherent use of music. But for the most part, I would encourage folks, especially when they're new or still starting out in video development, to not worry about music, not include music. Don't have that as part of the process for yourself. So based on that and what I've said, what percentage of instructors reported that their best self-made video did not, so negative, did not have music? So I have a poll everywhere set up for us. If you want to scan the QR code if you're in the room. Let me see if I can get, well, you can read the pollev.com/Dr. Pantazes. Let me see if I can put it in the chat for everyone, or do you, somebody else got that for me?
I got that.
Mark's got that, okay. So I'll give everyone a second there to get themselves connected so they can take their guess. If you don't want to use Pollev, that's fine, but I would ask that you think in yourself, in your head, okay, what percentage between 0 and 100 do I think are folks doing with the question? So I think everyone in here has had a chance to scan who wants to. So we'll go ahead and launch the first question. So what percentage of instructors did not have music in their video? I see some guesses down in the 20% range, 60, 70, 80, someone well over 90. In the middle, I see down in the 70, 80 range. I'm definitely seeing a trend in the direction of very high numbers, 60% or above. I know some people in this room already know the answer, so hopefully they're not cheating too much. Let's take a look. So it was 90%. And then the other remaining 10% reported some of the time. So this is great. From that sample, instructors were doing a great job of implementing this particular principle when it comes to music. So let's look at the visual side of coherence now. The interview, oh, sorry, skipped ahead there. 2 themes that came from my interviewees on the audio side. The instructors were saying it's probably not appropriate for my discipline. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then there were also barriers going on, things like, I don't know how to do it technologically, I don't want to worry about copyright, extra work to add it in, not worth my time and effort. So I think these line up pretty clearly with the results that we saw. All right, now let's go to extra visual with coherence. So this is another question for you. What percentage reported that their best self-made instructional video had those extra elements? So go ahead and take a guess.
So Tom, the extra elements meaning that weren't that were extraneous?
Yes, extra, extraneous, not needed to meet the goal, the learning objective of the video. Take a guess at what you think, how well that was done. Or in this case, not well done. So extras are bad, usually. So it seems like we're reporting again a high number of instructors are adding the extra visuals, incorporating the extra elements that are perhaps distracting from your goal and your learner. So in this case, it was 26% of instructors. So again, pretty good. Only 1 out of 4 were violating the principle, so to speak, that they were using extraneous visual elements. So I feel pretty good about that, but still 1 out of every 4, still some work to be done.
Question.
Yeah, go for it.
How well can someone judge whether something's extraneous?
Yeah. So you have to look at it in the context of what's being said as part of the video, what the learning objective of the video is, because in most instances, and in this case, I was relying on an instructor's own identification. They were the ones that said that. I wasn't making a judgment call. I was letting them make that judgment call. In terms of the instructors that I interviewed, there were a couple themes that kind of emerged that can help with this process. For one, instructors talked about wanting to focus more on teaching and not being an entertainer. They wanted to keep things concise and to the point in order to benefit students. And they used editing processes to really help them hone in their message. And editing took place in many different points throughout video creation. Sometimes they wrote a script and then went back and reviewed it and edited it down to something more compact. Sometimes they recorded something, didn't like it, and they did another recording, and then another recording until they got there. So a process of like practice until you get to the point that you like. And sometimes they recorded and used what's called post-production or editing after the fact to edit and streamline and bring it down. But in all the instances of these folks that seem to be doing a better job, they were editing, and they were putting an emphasis on that editing to make sure that the message that they were putting out there was focused and to the point. And they all talked about cutting back as the editing focus, not adding, which I think helped them meet this particular principle. So another one of the interviewees, and he will come up a few times, he is fascinating, it's George. He used the idea of a formula to help him stay focused and concise in his video communication. And you see 2 examples here on the screen. The one on the left should be very familiar. It's a standard 5-paragraph essay type of argument. But the one on the right is for what he makes when he goes out into the real world and creates what he calls field videos, where he's out there somewhere and he sees something that relates to the content of his class, and he pulls out his phone and he turns it sideways with the record button by his thumb. He hits record. He says, "Hey, I'm out here. I see this thing." He flips the camera around. He points at it. He explains it. He flips the camera back around, summarizes, and he's done. That's that basic gist right here of what he did. From there, he uploads right to YouTube, makes a few little edits, and he has a video for a concept in his class that he can utilize, that he's done as he felt inspired. And as he does it over time, he's built a relatively large library of these that he can pull from and draw on. Another example of a formula that you might utilize in your video creation process is to say, for every sentence of narration, I will have one new visual something, whether it be a new picture, an animation, a change, highlight, a signal, something. That is a formula to help in the development. It may not help with conciseness, but it will help with some other things coming down the line. So my practical suggestion number 2 for faculty who are looking to make video is establish for yourself some sort of edit and review process as part of your overall video creation process to help you be concise and stay on target. And you might be able to do that with a formula. Yes?
got a question.
All right, let's do it.
And folks, let me know on Zoom if you can't hear this. The person was surprised by the percentage for the external visuals or extraneous visuals is so low, because almost always see in seminars that animations are used, so flashing lights to highlight something important or something like that. So would animations not be considered external visuals, or would that be still coherent?
So in the context of a PowerPoint presentation where you want to bring up a new bullet point type of animation, is that what I'm assuming? And that actually is a great segue into our next point too, but if it's a change that's in support of the learning goal, I would say you're sticking with coherence. If it's a change to make it just be flashy and appear to maybe look good, then I would say, does that actually support your learning goal? Maybe not coherent. It really revolves around that idea of what is the goal, the message of this video that you are trying to accomplish. I think that helps. And let's get to the next point, because I think that's alluding to some of our next principle, which is signaling. This is when an instructor uses highlighting of some kind for important information in a video. And it's not just highlight with a marker highlight. There's all sorts of different ways that you can point out that something is important. So for example, signaling can take the form of outlining, where you draw a box around something. Or it can take the form of underlining the key concept or the key word. You can use color to offset something as more important. Or use some form of shape, or even a vocal cue where you say, hey, over here in the upper right-hand corner is this example of such and such. It's really important. Highlighting is what I mentioned. You could actually literally highlight. That's another alternative. If you're doing a screen capture, some sort of cursor movement where you're circling the thing or trying to draw attention to a certain portion of the screen. And you can also, like I said, point with your finger if you're on camera and it's just you to say, hey, look at this thing over here. That would actually be two examples of signaling, because you're saying, hey, look at this thing, and you're pointing at it. So here are some examples from the video artifacts that I collected, highlighting where signaling is taking place, underlining, finger pointing, giant yellow box around a concept. These are all examples that were pulled from the artifacts. So here's our next question. What percentage of instructors said that they were applying signaling principles in their best instructional video? Take a guess. Let's see. 70, 80, 100, 100, wow. 65, 80, 75. So I'm seeing definitely a more than 50% trend. Oh, someone just broke my more than 50% trend, but not by much. So definitely thinking more towards, yes, that this is being incorporated. So here's what the results said. 52% said yes when I asked this as a yes-no question. When I got a little more granular with the Likert scale, I had a 5-point Likert scale as well, it got a little bit better. It was up to 76, depending on how I collected them. So depending on how I asked the question, we're somewhere in that range. I like the 76 a little more. It's a little more granular, a little more detailed. So my suggestion for faculty is to, and it's what I would say is one of the first of my big takeaways, I only have 5 of those, is that add in some signals to your videos, whether they be vocal cues, a pointing finger, an underlining, a bold, something that you just remember to incorporate it as part of your video production process. Because I think it's easy sometimes to forget, but it has a real powerful effect and impact if you can do that. Moving right along, unless there's no questions, I'll keep rolling. So, all right, we're on to our third principle in this cognitive load, redundancy. How many of you like it when the person presenting reads the text on the slide back to the audience? This type of presentation style can feel awkward and uncomfortable. And one of the reasons why is that your brain is trying to do 2 things at once that both use a similar processing channel. And I don't know, I know some folks in the room are familiar with this game. If you've ever played this game here on the right, this is a perfect example of this principle in practice, where you're saying something and also trying to look at the picture and see if they match at the same time, and your brain wants to explode with frustration because it's hard to do that because it's occurring on the same processing channel in your brain. So the redundancy principle is when text is presented on the screen only, or you read it aloud as narration, but you don't present on the screen. It's one or the other. You want to avoid reading aloud text that is on the screen. That is the redundancy principle. So said another way, information is either spoken or presented on the screen, not both at the same time. And I hope the previous slide kind of highlights why that would be important. Is there a question coming?
Comment and question. So Suzanne said that a colleague of hers calls it that karaoke PowerPoint.
Oh yes, that's it. I've heard that before. That's a great one.
And Mike Murphy asked, he's curious, like with that game, as if there's anything from an inside perspective, like his 6-year-old always beats him. It's like, is there anything to that? Is it something that is more challenging? Maybe.
That's funny because I find that like my 8-year-old always beats us as well too. So I'm curious about that. If there is something there, I wouldn't know. I would want to dig into that a little bit. There's another aspect to that game that lets kids win because there's part of it where they have to go like this, and their arms are a lot shorter than the grown-ups, so the grown-ups are having to go a lot higher. But that's a great comment, like one I'd love to dig into at some point. So because I don't know the answer. All right, so how do we think instructors are doing with this? So how many instructors have read aloud on-screen text in at least 30% or more of their best video? What do we think? And let me go to the slide so you can vote. Man, we love that 70% number, don't we? Some in the 30 range, 60, 70, somewhere below 40, 80. Any more little pops? All right, so I hope you took a guess in your head and ready to see how we're doing here. So more than half of the sample were reading on-screen text in more than 30% of their video. So collectively, all of that was equal to 55%. In this instance, the interviewees provided some really good explanations as to why this was happening. So as I mentioned, George creates those field videos where he's out there and he's recording himself in the real world. That type of video cannot violate this principle because there is no text on the screen for him to read. It's just him talking. So that's our first idea there, right? That visual design is going to inform how this principle plays out. And I had another quote from another interviewee, Bertha, that helps explain the next two themes. She said, "I don't read as many words off the screen as I used to. However, sometimes if it's one of those phrases that's up there that's powerful, I will read it because I feel like it needs to be reinforced, not just by being there visually for the students, but by them hearing it spoken out loud." So a need to signal some important information to that previous principle may be causing some of this redundant reading going on. And so we just have to be real intentional about when we're choosing to read text that's on the screen and why we're choosing to do so. So that leads to practical suggestion number 4. Avoid reading on-screen text, which you can guarantee if you don't put any text on the screen. Now, I know that there are situations where text becomes an important element. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is using the notes field of PowerPoint as an opportunity to put the text you want for students to see when they're accessing the PowerPoint you might be using for the recording, and then leaving the slide portion for visuals. So that's an opportunity there to kind of meet that need. If that's one where you're like, but I need to give them this information, use the notes field, and then keep the slides itself very visual. Okay. Principle number 4. Spatial contiguity is when you have related words and images close together. And I believe there's been some presentation here before that talks about proximity. And so that's an opportunity where you should be trying to apply this concept. Here are 2 examples from my video artifacts. I think this one on the left does a much better job of like things connected to the visuals and like using the text underneath as a reference. Whereas this one on the left does an okay job. Word wall picture some association, but it's not as close as I think it could be. There's a better job that could be done there. So 2 examples, given that and what I've said, time to vote again. What do you think? What's your guess? about what percentage of instructors applied this particular principle in their best self-made instructional video. And I need to open it. I almost forget to do that. A little more distribution coming in here. We have a 30, a 40, a 50, a 60, no 70 yet. Anybody want to take that one? 80, 90. So a lot more range here. Anybody want to take 70? Anybody? No? Not seeing it? All right. So here's what the data said. So this is a crosstab of the two questions. If we look at the yes-no side of things, it's 79% said yes, but it got a little murkier in the Likert scale. We were around 71%, and we definitely have some instances of like, oh yeah, I say none of the time, and then I said yes. How does that work? So, and then all of these here, some confusion going on there. And the qualitative data that I had did not help explain this principle further because George didn't use on-screen text. The others were explaining assignments that didn't really have images. Visuals and text were really limited in the other two videos. So not a lot I can say about that practical implementation going on in terms of my data. However, my suggestion and recommendation to faculty based on the principle itself is that if you use images and text in combination, keep them close to each other. And if you combo this principle with the previous principle, use more images and less text. So I'm certainly driving a little bit of a narrative here. Try to use more visual components. All right, so this is a cousin. Yes, we have a question.
Yeah,
go for it.
From Grace. If related things are spread out across a page, or like on a slide, maybe in different parts of the slide, but they're coded according to their relationship. So similar ideas, they're not spatially together, but they're color coded. Is that creating some interference there?
It could be, but it would have to depend on what's the underlying concept that's going on that causes you to spread them out in that way. Is it that they were two extremes on a scale, but then there's a relationship between them, so you're trying to show the relationship? In which case, I think it would make sense. You're using color as a tool to help establish the relationship. And you'll hear me say this a lot with all of this. While these principles have some rules it's good to apply, there are scenarios and situations and contexts really where you might need to break them. So like rules with art, you know them and you apply them until you're intentional about breaking them. But it's that intentionality in choosing to break it that I think is important because you're demonstrating that you do understand the concept and you're breaking it with intent. So I don't know if that 100% answers Grace's question, but I hope it helps a little bit that at least you're thinking about it, and that's the important part. Okay, so temporal contiguity related to spatial contiguity is when you have an image that you are also talking about it at the same time, that they appear together, that the narration is occurring at the same time as the image is on the screen, that you don't show a picture of the sun while you're still talking about the moon for 15 seconds and then start talking about the sun, that you start talking about the sun at the same time the image comes up. That is the idea of temporal contiguity. So question time again. I'm just going to go right to the slide because the question's at the top. So what percentage of instructors were applying that principle in their video? So images were appearing at the same time they were being talked about. And this is their self-reported information, so I understand there could be there's a little murkiness there. So a little bit more leaning in this direction, but still some spread. That's interesting. But we're definitely up in the high percentage area, around 80 or so. So as you can see with this graph, most of the responses are pushed towards the right. So 75% of the instructors are self-reporting that they were incorporating spoken audio at the same time as related images in more than half their video. So pretty good implementation if we look here towards the right. So a common technique discussed by the interviewees that were good at implementing this principle was to show an image and then talk about it, which is exactly what I just did. So that's also the practical takeaway. If you have an image, show it, talk about it. So if we're thinking now as these principles are starting to stack on each other, if you're using more images, an image comes up, you talk about it with audio narration, not with text. You'll start applying these principles together in a way that then you're starting to create some effect. And again, I've mentioned this and I'll say it again. When you're creating video, a good rule of thumb, 1 sentence per image. Or so 1 sentence of narration with an image is a good pacing. And I use image broadly. It can also mean change. So like 1 sentence, you're highlighting one part of a diagram. 1 sentence, you're highlighting another part of the diagram. That's another way to think about it. So it doesn't have to be different images, just making sure there's a change that's occurring. We made it to the end of the first one. That's the long one. I promise the rest of them go faster. And we're doing great on time here. So we'll move on to essential cognitive load, but just to recap, coherence. Don't use music. Be concise via editing and formulas. Signaling. Add some. Redundancy. Avoid reading on-screen text. Spatial contiguity. When you use images or graphics, keep them close to text associated with them. And temporal contiguity, when you show an image or graphic, talk about it. So moving on. Next up, pre-training. This is the one principle that's a little different from all the other principles in that it doesn't directly relate to the creation of the video itself. It relates to the context around the video. Prior to viewing a multimedia product, instructors should consider providing terms and definitions of key concepts for learners. That is the idea of pre-training. It's a challenging principle to investigate because it relates to context, not the video itself. So, based on that very brief introduction to pre-training, what percentage of instructors do you think indicated that they engaged in this practice? Take a guess. So we see more of a move towards 40-ish%. Some out there, some down with somewhere in that 40 to 50% range. So the answer is 67% said they were applying the principle. However, none of the 5 people I interviewed explicitly stated that they were taught general concepts or vocabulary prior to having students watch their video, even when I kind of specifically asked them about it, when I said, what are students doing before they watch the video? So I don't have as much support from my data in terms of that implementation. 2 themes did emerge. Your pedagogical approach will influence how this works. If you provide students with a lot of choice through your content, they may choose to skip the pre-training and go right to the video, in which case it loses its effectiveness. The other side of that, and it's kind of related, is course structure. How your course is set up. If the very first thing is a video and there's no opportunity for pre-training in a unit, that also matters some. And what I'm curious about and haven't dug hard enough into the research to know is like how much of a time delay matters, right? Like if we pre-train them on the previous unit at the beginning of the previous unit and they're not getting to the video until later, I am not clear on how much of an impact that might have or not. Because I would assume over time that it's not as effective as if it's right there, right before they engage. But I don't know that for a fact. Oh wait. Practical takeaway, just ensure you're defining key terms and vocabulary before students get into a video. And it can be just a simple couple sentences right before they watch. Please watch this. Here's some key terms. Boom. All right, next principle is modality. It's when words are presented as spoken narration rather than as on-screen text. So a little bit different from redundancy. It's in that they're encouraging you to speak it rather than present it. So again, I asked the question, how well do we think folks have done that? But in this context, I asked it a little differently about what percentage of instructors reported their video was using audio narration. Wow, 30, 40, 50, 70, 80, 90, 100, 70, 70, moving towards 80. Looking good. So in terms of using audio narration, 97% of instructors were using audio narration. Instructors do that robustly. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's not a far jump from what you do in the classroom to what you're doing in terms of a video. However, it does appear that they're using a significant amount of on-screen text. The evidence from the video artifacts of the 5 interviewees kind of undercuts the survey findings just a little bit. George's video doesn't have on-screen text, can't violate the principle again. So there's something to be said about that type of video. 2 of the interviewees had 100% of their video with text-based information, while another had 82%. So given that mismatch, I don't feel like I have a clear understanding of how well this is being applied or not. But again, I would say your practical takeaway is keep narrating your own video. That's a good thing to do. But really look to keep cutting back on that on-screen text. And that connects with some of those other things that we've talked about already. This is the fun one. First, the segmenting principle states that it's better to break a multimedia product into user-controlled parts. Because content is contextual, I went with an approach of using time to measure this, dividing into parts. And when you look at the research literature, there are some key times that emerge. First, in an ideal world, you're keeping videos to under 3 minutes. However, given the content in higher ed, that is often difficult to do. So to maximize that relationship between the investment of time that you're going to put into create a video versus students' viewing of that video and engagement with that video, keeping videos under 6 minutes seems to be the sweet spot. You can convey a good bit of information in 6 minutes, and students are very likely to watch a 6-minute video. That's what the research has told us. That 6-minute mark is where a drop-off in engagement really starts to occur. If you have to go longer and you have good reason to, really try to stay under 15 minutes. That's really your hard point. Quality Matters sets that as their hard point. They're an organization that does online course design standards. And I'd also ask you to think about the TV shows that you watch and Netflix. Scenes within those shows typically are not longer than 15 minutes. They're usually much closer to this number. Not the whole show itself, but the scenes within the show. And that's the cultural context in which we're situated and what we're accustomed to. So I can go on this topic for a long time, but we'll get to the more important pieces of it here in a second. This is where I put a caveat in. And this is where that rule about maybe breaking the rule comes into play. I had an instructor who was doing a video on solving exponential equations. He did an example. It took him about 6 minutes. He's at time limit. But he knows in this situation, he needs to do another example to really cement what's going on. And so he was intentional in saying, I got to keep going. And I'm going to break the 6-minute rule. I think he was at 10 or 12. But he knew the rule. He broke it with intention. And because of the way his content worked, he knew it needed to work together. That, to me, is a great example of where your context will matter in your video recording process. So what percentage of instructors do you think had a video that was 6 minutes or less? The slide loaded it. Okay. 15 minutes. I'm glad the last 3 go fast. Again, we're way spread out. Fascinating. Okay, here we go. With my data, 19% of the instructors were 6 minutes or less. I think if you take blue and gray together, that's actually pretty good, that we're staying under that 15-minute mark. And the reason my average is pushed out is because I had a couple people who were like an hour long. They were way out there. And that pulled my average up from the median. So practical suggestion. Oh, I got to go to the themes. 2 themes emerged here. The first was a very intentional effort to chunk their content, being very deliberate about how am I going to break this up. And the other one, which I think is really useful, is they said before they recorded, I'm going to shoot for 6 minutes. They gave themselves a target to say, this is what I'm aiming for, and then they started recording. And they found that that was helpful to them to actually get close to their target. So if you go into your recording session with that mindset of, this is my target, this is my aim, and you've done the prep work, you'll probably hit it. And I found that that's been useful in talking with other faculty. They found that very helpful to them. So we've made it through these 3. Define key concepts ahead of time. That's pre-training. Use the spoken word more often than the written word. And then keep your video short by giving yourself that time limit. Question?
So Tom, say I've got basically I've been very intentional about chunking, what I'm trying to do, and for a particular module for a week, preparation class, I've got 60 minutes of video. Does it work with the segmenting principle to break that into 6-10 minute segments that are maybe distributed throughout, or even just individual videos that have a beginning, middle, and end?
So I think the important part is that you're giving students those chunks, those breaks. Because I've seen 60 minutes of video that's been very deliberately planned as one video, but it's got chapters within it that flows together. It tells a story. In that case, it's almost like watching a 50-minute episode of something, right? You've got a 6-minute scene, 6-minute scene, 6-minute scene. I think in that context, it can work. I haven't seen a lot of research around that, but I think just based on what I've read and understood, I think that can work. It's that making sure that students have those little chunks that they can work from. Does that help me? Is that you?
I guess maybe just a quick follow-up.
Okay.
Would it make better to actually literally break it apart and maybe distribute them amongst other activities?
I from using my instructional design expertise, would say yes, because it's concept, practice, I think helps, and it also ties into some science of learning concepts. I think it is retrieval practice is the one I couldn't remember this morning, where you've learned it, now let's go back, pull it back out and try it again. So that would be my professional recommendation if I were meeting with a faculty member. So does that help get to? Okay.
One question from Zoom,
Yes.
Grace. Regarding pre-training, what if the pre-training is part of the video itself? In other words, the beginning of the video, you're sort of laying out what those concepts are. Would that sort of count?
I think it would. I haven't seen any specifically research-oriented ways to do that, but yes, to me, it's like, okay, we're going to do this thing. Let me give you some key concepts. Now let me get into the thing. That would actually be I hadn't thought about that before, but I like that idea a lot, Grace, so thank you. I think that has some real value to it. I don't know how that fits in with storytelling. I know that's something that you focus on here, but y'all can figure that out. All right, last set of principles, and these go quick, I promise. The first one here, I'm just going to ask the question, what percentage of these instructors do you think used a conversational talking style in their video? So keeping the talking style conversational. 60, 70, 1 in the 40, 1 in the 40 to 50. There's always a gap. It's like some up here and some down here, and there's always nothing in the middle. All right. So while you...
Oh, there's one in the middle.
Oh, one in the middle. I said it, so now someone went to jail. That's fine. This principle is talking about the video narrator using a conversational talking style. That is what is encouraged. And I found that 93% of the instructors said that they were doing that. And when I looked at the interviewees, they all were applying this principle. One of the things that kind of came out in looking at the conversations with the interviewees is using the pronouns. Thinking about speaking to a single student, even though you might have 100, the student's going to view it as an individual, and so it looks like you're talking to them because you're using the you and we and me and I. And the other piece of that is that these instructors who are doing a better job of the principle application were really thinking about the video as a conversation with their students. Even though it was a little one-sided, they saw opportunities to present and share and do some things, and then in other ways that they interacted with students, it would come back out. And I see this in the way I use video with some instructors, where I have a consistent opening, and then when they see me in person, they're always like, Tom, you always open things that way. It creates that opportunity for conversation and trust building and getting to know me, which is a very important part of the learning process in classrooms. So my suggestion is approach narration as if you were speaking to a single student. Think about it in that context. Next one. This is a new question for everybody. If you had a choice, would you want to appear on screen in an instructional video you created? If you could choose, would you be on the video, yes, or would you not be in the video? No, I don't want to be in the video. That's you physically present on the video in some way. I have to actually show us how we're responding here. So 44% were like, if I had a choice, I'm not there. 50%. This is interesting. Almost half split. So I'm going to skip the next question because I like the way that this breaks out. So we're going to go right to the answer here. The next principle is the use of natural human gestures in the video. That you are in your video in some way physically. It's either your hand pointing or your face talking, that there's some natural aspect of you in the video, especially if you're the narrator. And look at that, almost pretty close to where we were. 49% of my instructors said that they were physically present in the video. So only about half. And I'm not surprised by that because many people are uncomfortable seeing themselves on screen. And the interviewees that I talked to did say that it got better for them as they created more video. So I think for some of us, it's just getting over that initial hurdle. And I know I was having some side conversations here with STLI staff about what are some techniques we can use to help instructors get more comfortable about being in front of the camera. Yes?
Does it make your video more effective to your face on?
Yes.
Okay.
I do believe it does, based on what I've seen and read, that it's more powerful for you. It gets tricky because coherence begins to come in a little bit. But I think at the end of the day, especially if you are the instructor in the course, that, like, this is my teacher, my professor instructing me from this, what appears to be like a very individualized focus, helps them. Yes.
A lot of the software has your slide and then your face.
Yes.
Disconnected. So I've wondered, does that even work? That's so different than you being in front of a board.
Yeah, it does. It does work. And I don't recall it off the top of my head, but I know that has been studied. And I can go dig up the research to pull on that for you if you're really interested. Somebody here can give me notes that I can find that one again. And I will say what I like about the tool that you have here is that I believe students have control over who and what they get to see. So if they don't like seeing you, they can turn you off. But if they want to see you because it's comfortable, they can leave you turned on. And that to me is powerful because you're giving students the choice in that scenario to make that decision. Does that help at all?
Our software also puts on subtitles.
Yes, super powerful.
Is it?
Subtitles?
That feels like information overload.
Well, so
Slide, face,
isn't the subtitles you can be toggled? Can't the student have the choice to turn it on and off? And that is what you want, because that is addressing folks who might not be able to hear. So that is, yes, that's a definite do. And then that scenario, it's a little different because folks that are using it are often not getting the audio in the way that they're like, I don't know how to say it, like person who can, correct, it's coming in. Yes, thank you. That's accurate.
A quick question, Tom.
Yes.
Any general rules for talking head video?
Any general rules for talking head video? In the sense of like smile, drink water before you start going, like look at the camera, try to have a little more energy than you think you need because the camera will eat your energy. There's a great book here that very digestible. Karen Costa is fabulous on many fronts, including here. They're like 1 to 2 page tips all about video creation for higher ed faculty. She has some great tips in here on screen capture stuff. I would recommend checking that out. You can ask Mark about it. I'm sure he can help you find a copy somewhere. So be a video star is my suggestion. Be in your video. Don't be afraid to be present in that way. I think this is our last one. So what percentage of videos had a natural human voice as opposed to a computerized voice? Seeing a lot at the upper end there. Although whoever picked 70-something%, or the folks that are trying to get close to 90, it was 98%. Almost everybody was using a human natural voice. That is definitely preferred over a computerized voice. And the one person that didn't was using both. So couple themes from this. Instructors are narrating their own videos. Please keep doing that. I think it's great. And the research says it's great too. It's a form of relationship building when you're the one there talking and speaking with some expression and energy, trying to be energized as you go through the recording. So smile when you talk. I think it helps. It comes through. When you're excited, that comes through the recording. Helps students with that information retention and understanding. So speak as if speaking to your students for personalization. Be a video star, be in your video, and then use a human voice, your voice or another human's voice instead of a computerized voice where possible. So as I chart all of this, this gives you a sense of each principle in terms of how it was reported. And I'm going to actually put this in a slightly better format. This is the order we went in, but here it is from best to not as good, but could be better. And I will say modality is probably reported a little higher than it should be. It's probably down here somewhere when you account for what I saw in some of the video artifacts. So these are the areas where I think we can have some impact. and where you can have an impact. So I was mentioning practical takeaways, and here they are. There's 12 of them. I just put them on the slide so you could take that one thing and be like, okay, here's some things I can do to help myself. They're in order. Yes?
So you mentioned avoid reading and text on your screen. So what if you are writing as you speak? How effective is that? Or drawing as you speak?
So drawing as you speak would be a different dynamic from my perspective, because there's a more visual aspect to that. The drawing one I would be curious, or the writing one I'd be curious as to why the writing would be taking place. Are you just writing something out for them? Or, now I'm knocking things over.
Because it's usually a sequence of steps.
It's like, okay, step one.
Process, yeah,
Okay.
steps.
So in that scenario, I
You
would.
can't learn that off the PowerPoint screen.
No, you can't. And I guess the context, right, is it something that you can do a more formal diagram of that you can work from revealing, or does it need to be like the written out pieces? I would need to see the context to be able to give you a better response.
It's hard to follow if you don't draw.
Okay.
Like places in the cell, organelles. So you had a diagram.
So I had a diagram, right?
Yeah.
So you're drawing it and you're labeling.
Yeah.
I think that would work in that context.
So they could take notes.
Yeah. Well, and
So what does the research say about that process of teaching versus?
I'd have to look because I honestly don't know that far. I didn't get that. Not down in that neck of the woods, but it's a great question. You have.
Yeah, one from Suzanne. She's thinking about this from a student perspective. So she's encouraging her students to do short oral reports.
Yep.
And she's like, any recommendations for a number of slides for a 5-minute report? So she finds that many students can't keep to the 5 minutes because they pack too much stuff in. So
I have found that like 600 to 700 words is for myself around 6 minutes, and I'm a little bit of a quicker talker. But you can ask students to like write something and pull out their stopwatch and record, like use the timer as they read it aloud. And that's good practice too, to read it aloud, to catch where it made sense writing but doesn't make sense speaking. And then you have a time to work from. And usually it's longer than it needs to be. And then you start cutting and figuring out how to tighten up your language and bring it down into something a little more manageable.
And I think based on what you said earlier, to cut down, to help them or us cut down on the amount of text on the slides, it's use that notes field.
Yes.
To bring a lot of information down there rather than have it on the slide itself.
Correct. And all of, for example, this presentation, which I will be making available, all of the things that I was saying are in the notes field, whereas the visuals were trying to convey those key points. And so that would be a representation example of that concept. I really want to think about that cell one. You've got me going well here. I have 5 big things. If you walk away with nothing, walk away with these. Be a video star, be in your video. Add some signals. Remember to add some signals because it's really easy to forget. Check your text. Do that review. Do that run through. Make sure you don't have too much on the screen. Just think about your text. Be careful about your text, especially as it relates to on the screen. And then account for your time. Give yourself that time limit. Try to stay at the 6-minute mark. And finally, just a reminder to cycle back to what I started about. It's really not about the tools. It's about how you're implementing these concepts with them. You can use all sorts of tools to do this. Just remember to do so. These QR codes are short little explainer videos that highlight some of the data I shared and talk about some practical pieces. You might find them useful, you might not. I'll make sure you have access. And I think I'm at time, right?
Yeah, is it okay if we take just
we can take plenty of questions. I'll stay as long as, yep.
So just a couple quick things. Andy asked about suggestions for how to make videos interactive with or for students, especially using or assigning the video asynchronously. Somebody else suggested, embedding Panopto quizzes throughout the videos and other means. But do you have any additional suggestions for how to make the videos more interactive for students?
So we're starting to get into how the video sits in the context of the course and your learning goals. And there are a lot of ideas. You can put a call to action within the video itself for something that students are now have to go out to do without having to add any Panopto quizzing or any of those in. That's a simple, but adding in some quiz questions on top of Panopto is also a good way to get some engagement. And I don't know about your system, but our system will tell us, we'll report that data back. So it's a helpful data point for instructors to go, ooh, 40% didn't get that right. Maybe I need to think about that and how I can maybe reteach or provide some more information. The problem with trying to answer that question is like I could spend a half an hour talking through the variations, and I don't want to load this up, but maybe have a conversation with the person in the STLI office that handles that, and I'm sure they would have some good suggestions. I don't know exactly who that is, but
Pretty much anybody.
Anybody?
Reach
Okay.
out to your departmental folks.
okay.
One other, just a quick question regarding fonts.
Ooh.
Are there some that, especially for on screen, some that are more legible? And then what's the smallest font size you recommend?
So don't go smaller than 18. And honestly, like I know one of the rules of thumb we've talked about this morning when I was talking to some folks, it's like around 10-ish words. Font sizes, I always have to look this up. I can't keep it in my head, but I believe it's the smooth ones you want to use, not the ones with the rounded corners. And I can never remember if it's serif or sans serif.
Use the sans serif.
Yeah, is it sans serif?
Sans serif. So Helvetica.
Yeah.
Arial.
I usually stick to the defaults for the most part. And I hope I got that right. I didn't just say something y'all say differently.
What font is that?
I'd have to look. The brain can only hold so much information.
Real simple. That's sans serif.
Yeah.
So I think that's it on Zoom. Unless anybody else on Zoom has questions or anybody else in the room.
Go for it. I love it.
So since we've been through the pandemic and almost everything shifted online, what have been the learning outcomes?
What do you mean by that in terms of?
Compared to, have there been any measures of how effective that classroom?
Well, so the first piece I would say is there's a big distinction between remote, everybody going online, versus online that's been designed, prepped, gone through the really, like we have a pretty extensive process. So like, I would look at those two things very differently because I think they are different. And I've been hesitant at some of the things I've seen come out in the literature that have been talking about learning experiences coming out of from the pandemic that were measured, because not in addition to just learning that's gone on, that was put online relatively quickly in comparison to the way some other things are done, there's a whole bunch of pandemic effects that aren't necessarily being accounted for in the sense of stressors, the fact that we weren't engaged with people in the same way. And I get really cautious about looking at anything from there without accounting for a lot of that. Because it's like if you're on Zoom for 5 hours a day, that's a problem.
Maybe non-pandemic virtual versus in person.
So it is done, and it's the no difference effect, no significant difference. When it's done well, when it's done towards some of the standards and design principles in the research, there is no significant difference in the ways that they've measured. And there's been a decent number of studies that have looked at it, from what I understand. Because I know within our space, we keep seeing some things come out about how the online teaching during remote, it wasn't as good as face-to-face. Well, yeah, it was done quickly and not with the design principles in mind by a lot of people who didn't necessarily have training in it in the way that we train for the other things. If you look at all this research done beforehand, yeah, it's still effective. So
if you say it's just as effective to do virtual versus classroom, if you look more closely at the type of student, and I heard this from students individually, I had some that wanted to keep going virtual.
Yep.
They do better, it's less distracting, and then others that are completely unengaged.
Yep.
Virtual. So what kind of data do we have about and maybe tailoring the
giving students choice,
okay.
Right? And I was saying this before the pandemic. Online is not for every student. It's not for every faculty member. And I believe that is still true. The difference now is that everybody's had exposure to some version of it. And so I think that it will help in some regards. People say, yeah, no. But with the challenge is, what did they experience? Because I've had some phenomenal online classes. I've also had some clunkers. So if they experience something that wasn't stellar, then their perception is skewed.
Would students be a good judge?
I don't know.
of which modality is better for them.
Yeah, I don't.
Because they're going through a class only once.
True. Here in Virginia, I believe there is an online class requirement for high school students. They must take a high school class before they graduate. So they have at least had that exposure to something online before they get here. And I think part of the justification for that was so that they could start to get a sense of, is this for me or not? I would say, like, this is just me spouting about big picture. Universities that figure out how to give students choice and help them make wise decisions are going to be successful in the long run over those that try to not be diverse in their offerings. Biodiversity is a good thing, right? In our environments, same concepts apply.
Yeah, well, there's already a large number of students that were back in person, but they weren't.
Yeah. An interesting anecdote I saw was, given that, ask the students the question, they say they prefer face-to-face, but then in environments where they have the choice, they end up defaulting to online. So when asked, they say one thing, but then their actions are the exact opposite. I found that fascinating.
I suspect part of it is, you know, if it's a rainy day and you're getting ready for your 9 a.m. class, you think, there's a Zoom option. I think I will opt for Zoom. You know, so, but it's not necessarily a strategic decision. It's a strategic decision, I guess.
It's a default decision.
But it's a default. Yeah, it's like it's more convenient. It's not necessarily it's better for my learning, which I think goes to Tom's point a little bit. That if you provide those options where students can opt into like specific experiences for reasons, but you know, there's always going to be that human element for sure.
There's still a challenge too. Like, there's a burden on instructors when you're asking them to teach in class and online and async. Like, that's a huge workload. So if you're going to create environments like that, there's a lot of resource that has to go into it to do it well.
Well, thank you. All those of you that are still on Zoom, thank you so much for staying with us. Hope you could hear us all well, and thank you for everybody being here. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.